Don't worry about the paperwork. He took our mother's house with one signature. 4 years later, his sale landed on my desk. He slid a tan folder across my mother's kitchen table and said, "You've got 30 days. Don't make this ugly." 10 years I had lived in that house as my mother's hands, her feet, and at the end, her memory. 10 years without one paycheck, one thank you, $1 back. And at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after we buried her, I learned the house I grew up in was never going to be mine. It already belonged to a company I had never heard of, his company. Here is what he didn't know. Every dollar I spent, every dose I gave her, every mile I drove. I wrote it all down, 10 years of it, in a 98-cent spiral notebook. And here is what he really didn't know. Today, reading property records is my job. I am a licensed title examiner. I get paid to find exactly the kind of paper trick he pulled. 4 years after he took that house with a piece of paper, his piece of paper came back across my desk. My name is Helen Marsh. I am 58 years old, and this is the story of how the quietest person in my family became the one person my brother should never have put his signature in front of. If you are new here, I tell these stories slowly, honestly, and all the way to the end. If that is what you stay for, take 1 second to subscribe, then stay with me. Because the folder he slid across that table is not where this story starts. It starts 11 years before that morning, on the night my mother's left hand stopped working. Her name was Ruth. She was a third-grade teacher for 31 years in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The kind of teacher grown men stopped in the grocery store to hug. She raised my brother and me alone after our father died young, in a narrow 2-story house on Fairfield Avenue, with a maple tree out front, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and pencil shavings. That house was her whole retirement plan and her whole heart, and she said, more times than I can count, "This house stays in the family. This house is for whoever needs it." I was 43 that year, divorced, no kids, working the counter at a fabric store, and living 20 minutes away. My brother Gary was 46, married, 2 kids, a regional sales manager with a lake cottage, a boat, and a way of walking into a room like the room had been waiting for him. 11 years before that morning, Mom had her first stroke. It took the strength out of her left side and some of the certainty out of her words, and it took about 4 days for our family to reorganize itself into the shape it would keep for a decade. Gary stood in the hospital hallway with a legal pad and said the sentence I want you to remember, because you are going to hear it again at the end of this story, and it will not mean the same thing. He said, "Here is how we'll do it. You are good with Mom. I am good with numbers. You do the caring. I'll do the paperwork. Don't worry about the paperwork. Don't worry about the paperwork." It sounded reasonable. It sounded, honestly, like a compliment. You are good with Mom. And if you've ever been the sibling everyone quietly agrees is good with the hard, unpaid, invisible work, you already know exactly how that sentence functions. It is not a compliment. It is a job assignment. It is a door closing. Within a month, Mom had signed a power of attorney naming Gary as her agent. A power of attorney. That is the document that lets one person sign for another. Her checkbook, her pension, her bills, her decisions about money. Legally, his pen could now speak with her voice. The lawyer who drew it up was a friend of Gary's from his golf league. I sat in the waiting room during that appointment. Nobody asked me to come in. And within 2 months, I had given up my apartment, given up my job at the fabric store, and moved back into my childhood bedroom on Fairfield Avenue, because Mom could no longer be alone at night, and Gary lived 40 minutes away, and Gary had a career, and Gary had a family, and I, as it was gently explained to me at a Sunday, didn't really have anything holding me anywhere. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't move in because I was forced to. I moved in because I loved her. I would make that same choice again, tomorrow. The betrayal in this story was never that I gave those years to my mother. The betrayal was what was happening to the paperwork while I did. So I moved in. I learned the pill schedule. I learned the physical therapy exercises, the shower rail, the way to cut food so she didn't feel like a child. And on the first night, sitting at that kitchen table after she fell asleep, I did the one small thing that would, 11 years later, take everything back. I opened a spiral notebook, college ruled, 98 cents plus tax, blue cover. And I wrote the date at the top of the first page, and under it I wrote what I'd spent that day at the pharmacy. $18.40. Not because I suspected anything. You have to understand that I did it because I was the daughter of a school teacher, and Ruth Marsh raised her children to write things down. I did it so that someday, when Mom was better, we could settle up. Remember that notebook. It matters more than anything else in this story. The first year was the hardest and the simplest. Hard because everything was new, the fear in her eyes when a word wouldn't come, the 3 a.m. falls, the way a bathroom becomes an engineering problem. Simple because the arrangement seemed to work. Gary called every Sunday. Gary paid the property taxes out of Mom's account and told me he had it handled. And I believed him because the lights stayed on and the tax bill never showed up red. And I was too tired to check things that appeared to be working. That is the thing about a caregiver's exhaustion. It is not just tiredness. It is a kind of tunnel. Your whole world narrows to the next dose, the next meal, the next appointment. The paperwork lives outside the tunnel. That is what he was counting on. 2 years in, I took a part-time job cleaning offices at night, 3 nights a week, while a neighbor sat with Mom. I needed something of my own, and I needed money because, and here is the first crack, the first thing I should have pushed on and didn't. Mom's money never seemed to be available for the small things. The pharmacy copays came out of my pocket. The adult day program, 2 mornings a week, so I could sleep. My pocket. The grab bars, the shower chair, the ramp for the back steps that a retired carpenter from her old church built at cost. My pocket. Every time I asked Gary whether Mom's account could cover something, the answer arrived in the same warm, unhurried voice. Cash flow's a little tight this month. Helen, her pension's mostly spoken for. Just keep your receipts, and we'll settle up. Don't worry about the paperwork. Keep your receipts. So, I did. Into the notebook. Line after line. Month after month. I wasn't building a case. I was keeping a promise to settle up someday. There is a difference, and the difference is why the notebook turned out to be so dangerous to him. A person building a case writes down the big, dramatic things. A person keeping honest accounts writes down everything, in order, in the same pen, on the same day it happens. Ask anyone who works with records for a living, and someday that would be me. Which one? A judge believes. 8 years before that morning, the furnace died. It was January in Michigan, 11 degrees outside, and the repairman stood in the basement and said the whole unit needed replacing. $4,200. I called Gary. He didn't answer. I called again that evening. He answered from a restaurant. I could hear glasses and laughter behind him. And when I told him, he exhaled the way you exhale at a child who has asked for something expensive. Helen. Her money is tied up right now. There is a certificate of deposit. You know what that is? The kind of savings account you can't touch without a penalty. And it doesn't mature until fall. Can you float it? We'll settle up. Mom was 76 by then. sleeping in a house that would be 40 degrees by morning. Of course, I floated it. I drained my emergency savings, the last real money I had from my divorce. And the furnace went in 2 days later, and I wrote $4,200 in the notebook. And Gary never mentioned it again. But here is the detail that kept me up that night. And I want you to hold on to it. When I'd called the bank that afternoon, just to ask a general question about whether Mom's account could cover an emergency furnace, since I was the one standing in the cold house. The woman on the phone was kind, and then she was careful. She said, "Ma'am, I am not able to discuss this account with you. You are not listed on it. Not listed. Matwan Heskein. 3 years of my life inside that house, every day and every night, and on paper. I did not exist." I stood in my mother's freezing kitchen holding the phone, and for the first time, a small cold voice in the back of my mind said, "If you don't exist on paper, then on paper, none of this is happening. The care isn't happening. The money isn't happening. You aren't happening." I pushed the voice down. "He is her son," I told myself. "He is my brother. Families are messy, not criminal. Stay with me." Because 3 years before that morning, the paperwork I wasn't supposed to worry about came to the house in person. By then, Mom's mind had begun to leave in pieces. Vascular dementia, the kind where every small stroke takes another drawer of memories with it. Some days, she knew me completely. Some days she called me by her sister's name and asked when the school bell was going to sound. Her doctor, a patient, thorough woman at the geriatric clinic, sat me down that spring and wrote a letter for our records. I remember the phrase because it was the first time the truth had been put in ink. The letter said my mother was no longer able to understand or make decisions about her finances, property, or medical care. I photocopied that letter at the library and mailed a copy to Gary because he handled the paperwork, and I filed the original in Mom's dresser. And I noted it in the notebook, the way I noted everything. The date matters. So I'll give it to you plainly. The doctor signed that letter on a Monday, the second week of April, 3 years before that morning. Hold that date. Base. Because that same week, on the Thursday, 3 days after the doctor put in writing that my mother could no longer make decisions about her property, Gary came to the house at lunchtime with a woman I'd never met. Pressed blazer, leather portfolio, a rubber stamp in a little black case. He introduced her as a friend from the bank, helping me get Mom's affairs organized. I had a pot roast going, and Mom was having a foggy day, quiet and far away. And Gary said, "Don't worry about it, Helen. It is boring stuff. Just keep her company in the living room when we're done. We only need the table for 20 minutes. 20 minutes at the kitchen table. Papers I never saw." The little black case opened and closed. At one point, the woman came into the living room, crouched by Mom's chair with her portfolio, guided Mom's hand, and said in the too bright voice people use with the elderly, "Just your name right here, sweetheart. You are doing great." And I stood in the doorway with a dish towel in my hands, and I let it happen. I've asked myself 1,000 times, why? Here is the honest answer. Because it was Gary, and Gary handled the paperwork, and I'd been awake since 4 a.m. when Mom wandered. And questioning your own family in your own kitchen feels like an act of violence when you've spent 10 years keeping the peace. So I wrote one line in the notebook. Thursday, Gary here with bankwoman. Papers signed. Ask him what. And I served the pot roast, and I did ask him. In the driveway, as he was leaving, he put his hand on my shoulder. He actually smiled. He said, "It is account maintenance, Helen. Signature cards, beneficiary stuff. You take care of Mom. Don't worry about the paperwork." That one line in a 98-cent notebook. Thursday. Gary here with bankwoman. Papers signed. would eventually be read out loud in a courtroom. I didn't know it that day. That day, it was just pot roast, and a dish towel, and a feeling in my chest that I refused to look at directly. If you've ever been in a family where one person controls all the information, and you can feel something is wrong, but you have nothing you can point to, nothing but a tone, a closed door, a 20-minute meeting you weren't invited to. I want you to hear this next part carefully. You are not crazy. The feeling is data. I ignored mine for 3 more years, and it cost me everything, except the one thing that saved me. The last 2 years of Mom's life, I barely left the house. She stopped walking. Then she stopped speaking. Mostly, except sometimes in the late afternoon she would look at me. Really look, all the fog gone for 10 seconds. And squeeze my hand with her good hand. 1, 2, 3. When we were kids, that was her code. 3 squeezes. It meant I love you. She died in her own bed, in the house on Fairfield Avenue, on a snowy Sunday morning in February. 14 months before that morning, with the tan folder, I was holding her hand. Gary was at the cottage. He made it there by evening, stood in her doorway with his coat still on, and the first complete sentence out of my brother's mouth in the house, where our mother had died 4 hours earlier, was, "Did she have any updated documents I should know about?" I thought grief made people strange. I gave him that excuse. For free. I had been giving him excuses for free. For 10 years. The funeral was beautiful and full. 3 generations of her students came. And afterward, the strangest quiet settled over everything. Gary didn't call on Sundays anymore. There was no reading of a will. And when I asked about one, Gary said Mom's affairs were mostly handled through the accounts. It is all pretty automatic. Give it time. I was 54 years old, grieving, exhausted down to the bone marrow, still living in the house, still watering her plants, still setting 2 coffee cups out some mornings, by mistake. 6 weeks after the funeral, on a Tuesday, my brother arrived at the door of the house I had lived in for 10 years. At 8 o'clock in the morning, dressed for a meeting. This is the morning everything. In this story counts backward and forward from. I am going to walk you through it, minute by minute, because I have replayed it minute by minute for 4 years. 8:02 a.m. I opened the door in my bathrobe, with a coffee filter still in my hand. Gary was on the porch in a gray suit, and behind him at the curb sat a car I didn't recognize, with a man inside who never got out. Gary said, "Got a minute? Won't take long." He walked past me to the kitchen table. Our mother's table, the one with the burn mark shaped like a comma from Christmas 1988, and set down a tan folder squared to the edge of the table, the way you set something down when you've rehearsed setting it down. 8:06 a.m. He said he'd give it to me straight. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. The top page had a heading I'd never seen in my life. It said, Maple Crest Property Group, LLC. An LLC, a limited liability company, a legal shell a person can own, so that the shell owns things instead of him. Under the heading, a paragraph, and in the paragraph, an address. This address, the house I was standing in. 8:07 a.m. Gary said, and I am quoting from memory that has not softened one syllable in 4 years. The house belongs to Maple Crest. That is my company. Mom transferred it a while back. Her idea, estate planning, avoiding probate. You wouldn't have wanted the hassle anyway. I am putting it on the market this spring. You've got 30 days. Don't make this ugly. I asked, when? When did she transfer it? He said, a few years ago. It is all legal. Helen, notarized and recorded. Notarized, meaning a licensed witness with a stamp. Swore my mother signed it knowingly. Recorded, meaning it was filed with the county. Made official. Made public. He used those words. Like a wall. Like a door. Shutting. 8:10 a.m. I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for 10 years, and my voice came out very quiet. I said, Gary, what about everything I put in? The furnace. 10 years of copays. 10 years of my life. 8:11 a.m. My brother looked at me across our mother's table, and he shrugged. I need you to picture it. An actual shrug. Shoulders up, shoulders down. And he said, Nobody made you keep receipts, Helen. That was your arrangement with Mom. Not with me. And Mom's gone. Nobody made you keep receipts. Hold on to that sentence, too. He is going to wish, in the deepest chamber of his heart, that somebody had stopped me from keeping receipts. 8:15 a.m. He stood, buttoned his jacket, said he'd have the paperwork for the transition sent over. That word again, paperwork. Always paperwork. And told me the locks would be changed on the first of the month as standard practice. Nothing personal. And he let himself out of the house our mother swore would stay in the family, and I stood in the kitchen listening to the refrigerator run and understanding, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I had just been evicted from my own life by my own brother, 6 weeks after burying our mother. At breakfast time, I did not scream. I did not call him back. I want to tell you what I actually did, because it is the whole reason I am able to tell you the story. I finished making the coffee. I sat down at the table with the burn mark, shaped like a comma, and I spent the next 3 days doing what the daughter of a school teacher does. I made copies. The doctor's letter about Mom's capacity, copied 3 times. One set mailed to myself in a sealed envelope, unopened to this day, because the postmark proves the date. The notebook, every page, photographed, backed up. Mom's old bank statements, the ones that still came paper because she never trusted computers. The blue statements, I called them. They came in a blue-edged envelope, gathered from 10 years of her dresser drawer and box. Photographs of the ramp, the grab bars, the shower rail, each with the receipt beside it. The one line from 3 years back, Thursday. Gary here with bank woman. Papers signed. I didn't know yet what any of it proved. I only knew that Gary's entire life ran on one belief, that the person who controls the paper controls the truth. Fine, I thought, then I will become someone who reads paper. On day 29 of my 30 days, I packed my clothes, Mom's recipe box, the blue statements, the sealed envelope, and the notebook, into my 14-year-old Corolla. I took my house key off my keyring. The brass one, worn smooth, the same key since 1988, and I stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment, supposed to leave it behind. I didn't. I put it in my coat pocket. It wasn't going to open that door much longer, but it was mine, and it was the last thing left that was, and some part of me, the part that was already becoming who I am now, thought, keys and paper. That is what this whole war is made of. Keys and paper. And peace owned. Keep both. Then I drove to a motel on 28th Street. And that night, alone, is not the night I cried. Write that down. If you are keeping score of me the way I keep score of everything, the night I cried comes much later. And it isn't the night you'd guess. If any of this is landing somewhere tender, if you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who did the caring while somebody else did the paperwork, the one who became invisible precisely because you were essential, do one thing for me right now. Type the word invisible in the comments. Nothing else. I read every one of them, and I want the people scrolling past to see how many of us there are. Now, let me tell you how a 54-year-old woman with a motel room, a notebook, and $11,000 to her name becomes the person a fraudulent deed is most afraid of. 6 weeks after I left the house, I answered a help-wanted listing for a records clerk at a company called Landmark Title. Downtown, a title company, the business that checks before any house is sold, that the seller actually owns it, that the ownership history is clean, that nobody's about to buy a lawsuit. I didn't apply because of some grand plan. I applied because it paid $14 an hour. It was quiet, and the listing said, must be detail-oriented and comfortable with repetitive document work. I read that line in the motel and I laughed out loud for the first time since the funeral. Detail-oriented, comfortable with repetitive document work. I had a decade of professional experience. Nobody would ever put on a resume. The woman who interviewed me was named Dolores, 69 years old, cardigan in July, reading glasses on a beaded chain, 41 years in title work. She looked at my resume, a fabric store, night cleaning, and a 10-year gap. For a long, quiet moment, then she took her glasses off and asked me what the gap was. I told her the truth. All of it, in about 4 minutes, dry-eyed, in order. The stroke, the notebook, the tan folder. 30 days. Dolores listened the way almost nobody listens. Without fixing, without flinching, without once looking at her phone. And when I finished, she was quiet for a second. And then she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Honey, paper doesn't lie for anyone. It just waits. Paper doesn't lie for anyone. It just waits." She hired me that afternoon, and for the next 4 years, that sentence was the floor I stood on. I am going to give you those 4 years the way they actually felt. Fast. Because you already know I survived them. What matters is not the errands. What matters is the transformation. I filed deeds until I could feel a wrong one through the paper. I moved from the file room to the search desk. Dolores taught me to read a chain of title, the ownership history of a property, every transfer, every loan, every lien, going back decades, the way her generation learned it, page by page in the county records. No shortcuts. I studied at the kitchen table of a 1-bedroom apartment, with the brass key from Fairfield Avenue sitting in a chipped saucer by the door, because I never did take it off my Keuring's old fob. And every night, it asked me the same quiet question. And every night, I gave it the same answer. Not yet. 2 years in, I passed my state examination and became a licensed title examiner. 3 years in, Landmark made me a senior examiner. I found forged releases. I found a contractor who'd been recording fake liens against widows. I found, twice, deeds signed by people who were medically incapable of signing anything. And both times, watching those transfers get unwound, I took notes that had nothing to do with my job. Here is what those years taught me, and some of you need it for your own situation. A power of attorney is not a blank check. The law calls the person holding it a fiduciary, a servant of the signer's interests, not his own. An agent under power of attorney generally cannot use it to give the principal's property to himself. That is called self-dealing, and a deed born from it isn't just improper. In most cases, it is void or voidable. Legally, it can be treated as if it never happened, and a notary who stamps a signature from a woman with documented dementia, without her understanding, has broken the rules of her commission. Every one of those sentences is a nail. I spent 4 years learning to swing the hammer, lawfully, for other people. I never once touched my own case. Partly because I couldn't afford a lawyer yet. Mostly because Dolores gave me one more piece of advice that second year, when she caught me at lunch reading the county's online index, with my old address typed into the search box. She didn't scold me. She just said, Not like this. When you go after it, and you will, you go in the front door, in daylight, with a lawyer, following every rule they broke. You be the opposite of him, or there is no point. So I closed the browser. I saved $400 a month into an account I named, in the online banking nickname field. Front door, and I waited, the way paper waits. 4 years after that morning, this past spring, the waiting ended, and I promise you, I did not go looking for it. It walked in. It was a Wednesday, 10:40 a.m. Our office manager was passing out the morning's new orders. When a house goes under contract, the buyer's side sends the title company in order to search the property and ensure the sale. I was at my desk with coffee. She set a folder on my tray, and I glanced at the property address the way you glance at a stranger on a sidewalk, and the sidewalk fell out from under me. Fairfield Avenue, the house. My house. A house. Seller of record, Maple Crest Property Group, LLC. Sale price, $410,000. The housing market in our part of Grand Rapids had gone wild in those 4 years. Gary had sat on the house, rented it out. I knew that much from driving past exactly twice, which I'd rationed myself like medicine. And now he was cashing out. And of all the title companies in Kent County, the buyer's agent had sent the order to Landmark, and the office manager, knowing nothing, had dropped it on the desk of the most careful examiner in the building. The next 60 seconds are the part of this story I am proudest of, and nobody saw them happen. I sat there with my hand flat on that folder, and inside me a 10-year-old fire said, "You could work this file yourself, quietly, and bury him." And I heard Dolores in my head. Front door, Midao daylight. Every rule they broke, followed. 10:44 am. I stood up, walked into my manager's office, laid the folder on his desk, and said 5 words. Conflict of interest. That is my family. I told him the seller was my brother, and the property was my late mother's. I recused myself, meaning I formally stepped away from the file. On the record, in writing, before touching a single page of it, the order went 2 desks down. It went. And if you think life doesn't have a sense of poetry, wait. It went to Dolores, who had 1 year left before retirement, and 41 years of never once missing a defect in a chain of title. Here is what I need you to understand about what happened next. Dolores did not do me a favor. Dolores did her job by the book, the way she'd done it since the Reagan administration, and that is precisely why it worked. Nothing in this story gets fixed by a friend bending a rule. Everything gets fixed by the rules, finally being read by someone who couldn't be bullied out of reading them. Remember, that is how he won for 10 years. Not because the rules favored him, but because he was the only one in the room reading them. A standard title search pulls every recorded document in the property's chain. 2 days later, Dolores, following standard procedure, pulled the deed that had haunted me for 4 years. And for the first time, I heard, through the wall of my recusal in the ordinary course of business, at an all-staff file review where problem files get discussed, what was actually on that piece of paper. It was a quitclaim deed, the simplest, bluntest transfer there is. A document that just says whatever interest I have in this property, I give to you. This one gave the house to Maple Crest Property Group, LLC, and it was not signed by my mother. It was signed, Ruth Marsh, by Gary Marsh, her attorney, in fact. Signed by Gary for her, using the power of attorney. Gary, as her agent, had signed our mother's house over to Gary's own company. Textbook. Self-dealing. The exact thing the law says an agent cannot do without explicit written authority. And her power of attorney, also in the county file, because his golf league lawyer had recorded it, contained no gifting clause at all, no permission, anywhere, for him to give her property to anyone, least of all himself. The deed was dated the second week of April, 3 years before that morning, with the tan folder, the Thursday, the kitchen table, the pot roast, the woman with the little black case, guiding my mother's hand across some other paper, while the real transfer sat in Gary's briefcase, needing only his own signature and a stamp. And the date on the deed was 3 days after her doctor signed a letter stating she could no longer make decisions about her property. At the staff review, Dolores said, in her flattest 41 years voice, "This title is unmarketable. The vesting deed is a self-gift, under a power of attorney. Underwriting will not insure over that without a court order, and no court order exists. Unmarketable, meaning no title insurance. And no title insurance means no bank will fund the buyer's loan, and no loan means no sale." Landmark notified all parties of the defect, in writing, the same day. Standard and procedural. Devastating. $410,000, frozen solid by a records, clerk's discipline, and a 69-year-old woman's reading glasses. That was a Friday. On Saturday morning at 9 a.m., I walked through the front door of a probate litigation attorney's office. Probate, the court that handles what the dead leave behind, carrying a banker's box. Front door had $31,000 in it. On the table, I laid out 4 years of preparation. I'd sworn I'd never touch until I could do it right. The doctor's letter, with its April date, the sealed envelope, postmarked, still sealed, the blue statements, and the notebook. My attorney, a calm woman my own age, who had spent 20 years on exactly this kind of case, read for 1 hour without speaking. She looked longest at the blue statements, and she showed me what I'd been storing in a box without fully seeing. Starting 8 years before that morning, right around the furnace, right around cash flows a little tight, Mom's account showed a withdrawal on the first of every month. $900 even to Maple Crest Property Group, LLC, memo line, management fee. $900 a month for 84 straight months. $75,600 moved from a dementia patient's pension into her son's shell company, in exchange for nothing anyone could name. Let me put that number where you can feel it. My mother's teacher pension was about $1,100 a month. He was taking 9 of it. For 7 years while I bought her medicine out of a night cleaner's paycheck, my brother was harvesting more than 80% of our mother's pension every single month, and telling me her money was tied up. It was tied up. It was tied up in his boat. Then my attorney opened the notebook, and she went very still, and she read it for a long time, the pharmacy lines, the furnace, the ramp, the pot roast Thursday. And when she looked up, she said the second best sentence anyone has ever said to me. She said, "Mrs. Marsh, in 20 years I have never seen a contemporaneous record like this. Written at the time, not reconstructed after. Do you understand what you have?" The last page had a running total, because of course it did, because I am my mother's daughter. 10 years. $41,200 of my own money, dated, itemized, in one hand, in one pen after another, ending the week she died. Nobody made you keep receipts. My brother had said, "No, Gary, nobody made me. That is exactly why they're going to believe every line." There was one more page, and my brother's own lawyer delivered it, though he'll never understand that is what he did. 9 days after Landmark's notice went out, with his $410,000 sale dying on the table, Gary's lawyer tried to rescue it. He recorded a document with the county, filed it that week, 4 years late. A paper nobody outside that kitchen had ever seen. It was titled, "Amendment to Durable Power of Attorney." County records are public. My attorney had a copy the day it appeared. It was dated that same Thursday, and it claimed to add one new power to the document Mom had signed years earlier. The power for her agent to make gifts of her property, including to himself. It answered the question that had lived in me since the pot roast. And at the bottom, in a wavering, guided hand I would know anywhere, on a foggy day. At 81, 3 days after her doctor certified she could no longer make decisions, my mother's signature, stamped and sworn by a notary. The woman with the little black case. Just your name right here. Sweetheart, you are doing great. That was the 20 minutes at my kitchen table. He hadn't just taken the house with his own signature. He had first taken my mother's hand, her good hand, the one that squeezed mine 3 times every afternoon, and used it, while I stood in the doorway with a dish towel, to sign away her own protection. I want to tell you, I raged. I didn't. Something in me went very cold and very orderly, like a file drawer sliding shut, because a person who signs a gifting amendment 3 days after an incapacity letter hasn't made a clever move. He has written a confession with a date on it. He just doesn't know it yet, because he never imagined anyone would hold both pages at once. I held both pages. I had held one of them for 4 years without knowing what it was worth. My attorney filed our petition in probate court on the first Tuesday of June. In plain words, we asked the court for 4 things: reopen my mother's estate, declare the amendment void because she lacked capacity to sign it, declare the deed void because without that amendment, Gary had no power to gift himself anything, and order a full accounting, every dollar he touched as her agent, explained under oath. Then, I did the one thing my attorney called unnecessary, and I called non-negotiable. Before Gary was ever served with court papers, I asked for 10 minutes, face to face. She sat in the corner. His lawyer sat next to him. We met in a conference room with bad coffee, and my brother came in wearing the same gray suit, still walking like the room had been waiting for him, and said, "Helen, long time. How? I hope this is about being reasonable." I had written my statements on an index card, and I read them, in order, in the voice I use for reading legal descriptions, which is the voice of someone to whom the outcome is not in question. Now, 1. The deed to Fairfield Avenue is void. You gifted yourself her house, using a power she never validly gave you. The amendment is dated 3 days after her doctor certified her incapacity. I have the letter. The county has your date. 2. The accounting will show $900 a month for 84 months, from her pension to your company, $75,600. You will explain, under oath, what Maple Crest managed. 3. My records of 10 years of her care, every receipt you told me to keep, total $41,200. You told me to keep them. I kept them. 4. The notary from my kitchen has been reported to the state. What happens to her, and what the county prosecutor does with the file my attorney is sending them, is out of my hands. It went out of your hands 3 days after the doctor's letter. You just didn't notice. 5. There is nothing to negotiate. This meeting is a courtesy. The same 30 days notice you gave me, in the same spirit. Then I stood up, and I gave my brother back his sentence. I'd carried it 15 years. He could have it. Don't worry about the paperwork. Gary, it is handled. And I walked out of the room while his lawyer was still asking him, in a rising voice, whether any of the dates I'd just recited were accurate. What followed was 6 months of my brother meeting. For the first time in his life, a system that read every page. He called me 9 times in the first 2 weeks. I let every call go to voicemail and preserved each one, because preservation, I had learned at a kitchen table long ago, beats reaction. every time. The voicemails traveled the whole sad arc, breezy, then wounded, then furious. Then, in the last one, almost childlike, Helen, come on, it is me. His wife emailed me, one line, family is family. Helen, I hope you remember that. I typed one sentence back, and it is the only reply I sent to anyone from his household during those 6 months. That was my position for 10 years. He showed up at Landmark once, in the lobby, loud. I did not come out. Dolores did, 5'2", reading glasses on the beaded chain, and told him this was a place of business, that his transaction file was closed, and that the door was behind him. She was retired within the year. I believe she considers that morning a career highlight. I know. I do. Stay with me now, because this is where the paper finally speaks out loud. The hearing came in November. Gary's lawyer had tried everything short of a defense. Delays, a motion to seal, a settlement offer of $40,000 that my attorney read aloud to me and then, at my nod, declined in a 2-sentence letter. Because I didn't want a payment. I wanted a finding. Befinding. There is a difference. And if you have ever been called crazy, dramatic, or greedy by the very people who were quietly taking from you, you know the difference is worth more than money. A payment says go away. A finding says it happened. In the courtroom, the evidence went in almost without resistance, because dates don't argue. The doctor's letter, Monday. The amendment, Thursday. The deed, the same week. The judge, a precise, unhurried woman who reminded me a little of my mother running a classroom, asked Gary's lawyer exactly one question about capacity. And it was this: Counsel, is there any medical evidence in this record, from any date, contradicting the treating physician's letter? There was a pause. 5 seconds is very long in a courtroom. The answer was no. Then my notebook was admitted into evidence, and my attorney read pages of it into the record. And I sat with my hands folded and listened to 10 years of my life being spoken aloud in a room built for truth. $18.40. Pharmacy. 4,200. Furnace. Thursday. Gary here with bankwoman. Papers signed. Ask him what? When she reached that line, the judge asked her to stop and ask the date, and looked at it next to the amendment for a long moment and wrote something down. I will tell you what she later put in her written opinion, because I have read it enough times to recite it. She wrote that my notebook was the most reliable contemporaneous record before this court, and that the events of that Thursday, quote, were witnessed, unknowingly, but precisely, by the one member of this family who wrote things down, unknowingly, but precisely. If my mother has a headstone summary of me, it can be that. The rulings came the second week of December, and I'll give them to you flat and factual, the way consequences deserve. The amendment was declared void. My mother, the court found, lacked capacity to sign it, and the notarization of it was improper. The deed fell with it. Void, set aside, erased from the chain of title as if it had never happened. The house on Fairfield Avenue came back into my mother's estate, which meant it finally went where the law had always said it should go the day she died, with no valid will. To her 2 children, equally, except accounts have 2 sides, and mine were in a notebook. The court ordered Gary to restore the 84 months of so-called management fees. And here, Michigan law had one more thing to say, and I'll say it plainly. A fiduciary who converts money from a vulnerable adult can be held for double the amount taken. $75,600, doubled, plus interest, became a judgment against my brother of just over $180,000. The court approved my claim of $41,200 against the estate, and it assessed my attorney's fees against him personally for bad faith conduct as a fiduciary, when everything he owed was set against everything he stood to inherit. His half of our mother's estate was gone. The court signed an order awarding the house to me outright, with a small balance Gary still owed on top of it, which he paid by selling the boat. I know it was the boat because my niece told me, and we'll get to my niece, because she is the one warm thread this story lets me keep. The notary lost her commission after the state found she had notarized the signature of a person who plainly lacked understanding, and the bank that employed her let her go the same month, and the county prosecutor's vulnerable adult unit, working from the accounting, offered Gary an agreement. He admitted, in writing, in a public file, to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, probation, restitution already ordered, and a permanent letter in the record of a man whose whole life had been built on there never being a record. He never spent a night in jail. People ask me if that bothers me. It doesn't, and I'll tell you why. Jail is temporary. Paper is forever. Somewhere in the county building where I work with deeds every single day, there is a file with my brother's name on it that says, in his own signed words, what he did. Paper doesn't lie for anyone. It just waits. His is waiting permanently, in the one place he can never talk his way around. Now let me tell you about the night I cried, because I promised you I'd only do it once, and I keep my ledgers. On a cold Saturday in January, a month after the rulings, a locksmith met me on the porch of the house on Fairfield Avenue. The tenants were long gone. The rooms were empty and echoing and smelled like strangers. He changed the locks, my locks now, and handed me 2 new brass keys, and I stood in the kitchen, where the tan folder had been squared to the edge of the table, and I took out my keyring, and I moved one of the new keys onto the old worn fob, right beside the key from 1988, that no longer opened anything. And then I walked upstairs to my mother's empty bedroom, where the February light used to come in over her bed, and I sat down on the bare floor where I had held her hand while she left, and I cried for the first time since any of it began. Not for the house, not for the money. Sauq, not even mostly for Gary, though there was a thread of him in it, the brother who taught me to ride a bike, whoever that person had been. I cried for her. For 10 years of 3 squeezes on my hand, for the fact that she never knew what was done with her own signature, and never will, and that this, her not knowing, is the only mercy in this entire story, and her son is the reason it counts as one. One cry. Alone. On the record. Then I stood up, washed my face in her sink, and went downstairs to measure the kitchen for paint. You may be waiting for the reconciliation scene. There isn't one. Gary and I have not spoken since the conference room, and I expect we never will. And I have made a strange peace with that, because the brother I miss stopped existing somewhere between a hospital hallway and a golf league lawyer's office. And you cannot reconcile with someone who was. It turns out, mostly paperwork all along. But I told you there was one warm thread. And here she is, my niece, Gary's daughter, 26 now, a nurse, of all the perfect things. Found the court file herself, read all of it herself, and showed up on Fairfield Avenue one Sunday, with a coffee cake and her grandmother's stubborn chin. She sat at the kitchen table, put her finger on the burn mark shaped like a comma, and said, "Grandma did this with the roasting pan. Christmas." You yelled. She laughed. Then she looked up and said, "Aunt Helen, I read everything. I just want you to know somebody in that house. Read everything. She comes most Sundays now. She is the reason I know about the boat, and the reason I believe families are not chains you are locked into, but documents you get to amend. Properly, knowingly, with full capacity. So here is where everything in this story ends up. And I want to put the 2 objects from the beginning back on the table, where you can see what they've become. The brass key. For 4 years it lived in a chipped saucer and meant everything that had been taken from me. A door, I fed a decade of my life through, locked from the other side by somebody else's paperwork. It sits on my keyring today next to its replacement, and it means the opposite now. It means that a lock is only ever as strong as the paper behind it, and the paper behind mine is finally, permanently, mine. Some mornings, leaving for work, where I am now, I should tell you, the senior title examiner who trains the new hires, in the chair where Dolores used to sit, I feel the two keys together in my pocket, the dead one and the living one, and it feels like the before and after of my whole life, riding along in one coat. And the notebook, the 98-cent spiral notebook, that began as a promise to settle up. For 10 years, I thought I was keeping track of what I gave, a ledger of my own disappearing. I had it exactly backward, line by line, without knowing it. I was keeping the only true record of what I was worth, proof, dated and itemized, that the invisible work was real, that the invisible years happened, that the invisible sister existed all along. The court called it the most reliable record in the room. My brother built his whole plan on paper, and in the end, the paper that mattered most was mine. It is retired now in an acid-free archival box. I do work in records, after all, on the shelf in my mother's old room, and on the kitchen table, there is a new spiral notebook, blue cover, first page, dated, but there are no receipts in this one. It has paint colors in it, a list of tomatoes to plant where her garden used to be, my niece's graduation date when she finishes her nurse practitioner program, the things you write down when the settling up is finally over. If this story found you in the middle of your own version of it, if you are the one doing the caring while someone else does the paperwork, I am going to leave you with 3 sentences, and they are the entire lesson of my last 15 years. Write everything down, in order, the day it happens. Ask today, whose name is on the paper, because love is not a document, and a document is what the world reads. And when the time comes to fight, walk in the front door in daylight, following every rule they broke. Because the cold, patient, lawful way is not the weak way. It is the way that ends with a judge reading your grocery, money handwriting out loud in a courtroom, and calling it the most reliable thing she is seen. If you stayed with me all the way to this table, thank you. It matters more than you know. If you haven't yet, subscribe so the next story can find you, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and whether there is a notebook in your life that somebody someday will wish you'd never kept. My name is Helen Marsh. I do the caring and the paperwork now, and nobody made me keep receipts. That is exactly why you can believe every word.